This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Sound Porter Mastering, Atom Audio, OWC, Jay-Z Microphones, Spectra 1964, and Isotope. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now on the Jay-Z BB29 microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX 100 mic pre, C610 complementer, and Isotope RX and Ozone. So get ready to rock.
Listening to a great hip-hop record is like, they ain't doing anything. There's no overdubs on this record. They're not adding another guitar track because it's not cool enough. They're taking things away. And that's what makes the song seem more powerful all of a sudden. It's like, oh, they got rid of all the drums. Wow, that was really powerful. So it was like, let's get out of this trend of like, oh, something's not right. Pile it up with more stuff.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio.
I'm Brian Murphy, and I strive to produce masters that move your song emotionally, but maintain the spirit of your mix and the intention of the artist. My promise is to give your music its best sonic performance, not simply change it. You work hard on your mix, and I always want to respect that. My goal is to help you realize how great your mix can be, and I'll work hard to make sure it succeeds. I don't just master, I help your mix sound the best it can. Contact me for a free mastering demo at soundporter.com.
I've got two words for you that will help you make your best record ever and not lose it: storage and backup. You want fast drives for composing and recording, and reliable drives for backup so you don't lose all your hard work when something goes wrong. That's why I chose OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G internal SSDs for my studio computer and Mercury Elite Pro external drives for archiving. Discover the best OWC drive options for your studio at macsales.com/rockstars. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Daniel Schlett, a producer, engineer, mixer, and owner of Strange Weather Studios, seen on the cover of Mix Magazine in 2019 as one of the best rooms in Brooklyn, New York. Daniel's production finds itself at the creative intersection where acoustic and rock and jazz recording meets loop and edit-based production. His discography ranges from New York City hip-hop to live in-studio performances to rock production from Mali, even, with a clear sense of how each sounds best. Daniel has worked with many great artists, including Iggy Pop, Booker T, Songhoy Blues, P-Lander Z, Ghostfaced Killah, War on Drugs, Luke Temple, and Here We Go Magic, Combo Chibita, The Lost Brothers, and many, many more. And I've been enjoying a fantastic sounding playlist for you in the show notes, which you can click through and go check out. I'm super psyched today to talk with Daniel about his philosophy of production with a wide range of musical styles and see what we can learn about working with a variety of artists. Thanks also, and a big shout out to Dave Hintze over at API for making our introduction. So please welcome Daniel Schlett to Recording Studio Rockstars. Daniel, are you ready to rock, man?
I sure am, and thank you for the lovely intro.
Oh, you're welcome. You know, this is a new introduction for me, and it's been a whole lot of fun to discover this stuff you're doing. There's something about it that just really is very New York to me too, and the whole vibe of what I experience when I go to Brooklyn and the coolness of the music that's coming out of there. So well done.
Well, thank you. That's the greatest compliment I could get. You know, it's like, I want these records to sound like New York. No offense to people elsewhere, but I want to retain some of that, you know, magic and grit and, you know, the hard pace and energy that comes with being in New York. This is not Hollywood. This is not, you know, laid back California. This is a tough town.
Yeah, well, there's you know, I'm always struck by it too, because here I am in Nashville, and this is sort of home of the, you know, everything starts with the songwriter on an acoustic guitar, and then it goes to, you know, the band in the studio, and I know I'm sort of generalizing, but
no,
I'm struck by New York, how there's this great combination of both an appreciation for the performance. So you've got like these jazz influences and people playing instruments, but also a real appreciation for music being created. I imagine in headphones in an apartment on a computer a lot of times.
Yeah, it comes in both lanes. We're doing stuff live in the studio to capture like those raw sounds, with good microphones and nice instruments. And then absolutely putting them in a laptop, taking them home, hours in headphones, micro editing, nudging and quantizing and getting the best of both worlds. The improvisational aspects of jazz and, real people playing music together with, sort of the accuracy and like neurosis of like an Aphex Twin character who's,
Nice.
Got all those things we all love. They're not so different, so to speak, like they're good music. That's the core of it, right? It's like, I like this because it's good. I don't like it because it's a programmed drum set or an acoustic drum set. I like it because it's good. And when you talk about like Heart of Nashville, starting with the song and the songwriter, I'm still a huge advocate of like, the music has to be good. Like it starts there. It starts with like, this is good first. Then we make it cool and we do all the, spicing things up and making it, sound crazy and really exciting. But like, if it's not cool to begin with, it's not like we're just doing that with editing or with a Pultec EQ or something like that. That's not making it cool,
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, I always remember feeling like people would ask, what kind of music you're into? And I finally felt like the answer is, well, I just like good music,
Precisely, and that ranges all across the board. My girlfriend and I have spent a lot of time lately listening to like, old bluegrass records. And I'm on a huge like doo-wop kick right now, all 50s, like
Nice.
doo-wop, but it's like, it's just good. It has nothing to do with programmed or not programmed, huge fan of like Chicago house music, all in the same day. I can wake up and listen to the, old country tracks and, footwork from Chicago, and I'm not really skipping a beat. It's just a good song.
Nice. I like that term micro editing. I almost imagine that like there's different genres of musical production, the macro editing and the micro editing.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, especially you mentioned before we started rolling about an artist named Casa Overall. And one thing that he and I really spent time on and like trying to develop was just like these, micro silences, those little silences between beats and chopping off the attack of a drum so that it just opens up like halfway through, like where it sounds clearly edited. Those things were very, very deliberate and intentional to sort of capture the feel that he was going for. He played those drums, but he wanted it to sound like someone ripped it off a record and played it on an MPC pad without having to do that transfer process of transferring it to the MPC. But, no, it's not, don't cut it before the transient, cut it right after the transient, or,
Oh, cool.
Like don't put a crossfade, don't edit that on the grid line, like cut it a little bit before. So it feels like, a little more abrupt than it should. It shouldn't be so pleasantly on the beat. Let's cut it right before the grid line, those kinds of things.
That's brilliant. And I love hearing you talk about the importance of the tiny spaces. I don't remember if that was the word you used exactly, but I think about that all the time. And that comes up a lot when I'm trying to have these discussions with bands I might work with, where it's like, even understanding like a bass part, like the space between the bass notes is every bit as powerful as the note that you choose and all that kind of stuff, because those spaces are so important.
They're massively important, and they make up all the difference later. Again, the song isn't just the bass part. The song isn't just the drum beat. It's all of those elements molded together, and they just have to come out of the speaker as one sound at the end of the mix. It has to come out of the speaker as one big dynamic sound. And so when you have the interplay and the space between the notes, you give room for that hi-hat, or you give room for that vocal breath that was like, you would have just passed over it if you didn't hard cut everything else. But maybe that vocal breath was really like moody and made for a dramatic effect. And that's the thing that helps it, when you pay attention to those spaces around the important note choice or the important element that's supposed to be sort of highlighted when you get there, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of a couple of thoughts that I've had. One being the times where I become almost acutely aware of the spaces if I'm performing something, and then I'm unpleasantly surprised to discover that they aren't really translating out of the speakers. And then another is remembering, that sometimes you just cover up those spaces because you're not really, I don't know, something about how you're capturing it or how you're playing it back in the speakers maybe isn't showing them to you enough for you to remember that they're there. And then you fall into that classic trap of like just thinking, oh, we should just keep layering stuff on this production, and just cover it all up.
Well, and that's where my brain always takes me back to like listening to a great hip hop record is like, they ain't doing anything. There's no overdubs on this record. Right. They're not adding another guitar track because it's not cool enough. They're taking things away. And that's what makes the song seem more powerful all of a sudden. It's like, oh, they got rid of all the drums. Wow, yeah. that was really powerful. They got rid of all the elements and it made it sound bigger. So it was like, let's get out of this trend of like, oh, something's not right. Pile it up with more stuff. It's like, no, then we can't hear the good thing that we already had. Like, you made a great bass line. Let's hear that. You have a great chord progression. Let's hear that, like we don't need to mask it with a ton of things unless we're talking about something where it's like a beautiful counterpoint where there's a dialogue between the voice and this other instrument or this syncopation and this other rhythm with a percussion track. Like if there's a real dialogue happening there, I'm all for that. But if it's just like, oh, let's double this up because it's, not coming through, it's like, no, let's find a better way to highlight this. And it's not always through doubling or making it layered.
It's interesting. I know that in advance we knew we were going to like try and dig into some philosophy of this stuff, but I'm loving this topic already. So it makes me want to ask the question, like, why do we instinctively think that we need to layer something or do something? It's almost like making records is like, being in a relationship and having sex or something, where it's like the first, in the beginning, it's really exciting. And then a moment later, you're sort of not feeling that same excitement. So then you think, I got to get the excitement back. So I must have to do something like layer something on top of this production.
Yeah. And I think a little bit of that is like syndrome of the modern age, right? It's like back in the day, it was like you had, let's go all the way back to the Beatles, right? Or even earlier, it's like you had a track or 3 tracks and okay, well, we need to put the guitar riff here, cut the tambourine so I can punch the guitar in. And then when the guitar riff ends, we'll put the tambourine back because there's not another track. But now with Pro Tools or Ableton or whatever, it's just like, I can put 180 tracks on this song and the computer won't really tell me otherwise unless I'm doing, 192 sample rate. It'll start, telling me, okay, you're out of tracks. But I think that just the access of being able to do that really just like for creative process, I think that's fantastic. I think that ability to be able to try every idea and see what works without the limitation of like the engineer telling you, hey, we're out of tracks, that can be a little stifling. But when it comes to thinking about like, is this working actually? Or like when we're trying to make the mix happen and like, we want to hear those elements, that's where I start to realize like, this might not be the approach. This might not be the right call every time to just like pile it up. Yeah, there's absolutely moments where more is more, and it does get bigger when you put more stuff on there. But it doesn't always seem to just translate that way. So, binary 1 to 1,
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder has anybody done a 180 tambourine production yet? I'd like to hear that.
I'd like to hear that. It sounds like a Steve Reich record I'd be into.
Nice. Do you want to know how I get a consistent sound quality mixing hundreds of episodes of Recording Studio Rockstars? Well, I've been cheating all along by using Isotope RX and Ozone on every single episode. Right now, you are hearing RX D-Click, D-Clip, DS, Deplosive, Voice Denoise, Ozone Multiband Compression, EQ, and limiting on my voice. If you want great consistent mixes too, go to isotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get an additional 10% off. The secret to great sounding bass in your mix is to start with a great recording. If you've got an awesome part, player, and instrument, then all you need next is to plug that into the BBDI passive direct box from Spectra 1964 through the C610 comp limiter, and you've got an incredible bass tone that goes all the way down. The BBDI is the best sounding bass DI I have ever used. It'll move your pant leg. No hype, no color, just pure tone at Spectra1964.com. Well, so Daniel, I did a pretty brief introduction to you. Let us know, let the rock stars know more about who you are. How do you go from starting out in music briefly to getting into recording in this beautiful studio that you've got now?
Well, thank you for the kind words there. But, I was playing in bands. I grew up as a guitar player, playing in bands and composing music. I remember getting a loop pedal and like learning how to sort of self overdub on my guitar tracks. I had a little cassette 4-track, like a Tascam Porta studio that, still have at the studio and still use from time to time when it calls for it. But, realizing, how do I say, the repertoire of being in the band was sort of what was feeling like the biggest limitation. I was into so much music. I loved the Talking Heads. I love Johnny Cash. I love Fela Kuti. I love Wu-Tang. I love all this stuff. But my band is like a crazy punk band, and we play crazy punk music. I'm not feeling like fully fulfilled here yet. I'm not feeling like I'm getting all the stuff I want to do. And personally, sort of as a joke, I didn't want to hear that band that played reggae, country, punk, all in the same set. I thought that band was going to be terrible. So how can I be in all these different bands and make all this different kind of music and still feel like I'm getting my creativity out? It's here in the studio where I get to work with all these different types of groups and feel sort of a part of, making the music with people, helping sort of, see the song kind of take shape and make every, come out of the speakers and everybody's like, yeah, finally, this is it. This is what we've been going for, and again, I think that to go back a little bit when I was playing in these bands and, traveling with my friends and stuff, there was always those moments where, we'd come back from, a day in the studio or 2 days in the studio, because that was all we could ever afford to do. And just sort of feeling like this didn't come out right. This didn't come out the way we thought it was supposed to. And, I sort of felt like, well, this is where I fit in here. I can be the person who makes sure that it comes out the way we want it to. And I can also feel like I'm not limited to the repertoire of just like my band.
Yeah. That's cool, man. And hearing you talk about it, I'm reminded of somebody that there was one of the productions on your credit list, Vonneton Gat or Vonneton Gat. Those guys, Kevin McMahon, who I just did an interview with, I believe worked on that song with you. Maybe, I don't know if you guys worked on it together or at different times.
Kevin McMahon, I don't know him, but we didn't work on it together.
Okay, cool. Well, I think he was part of that process too. And he was talking about his experience of doing live sound with artists and seeing that difference between the band performance and what was captured in the studio. And when you're talking about that, that just kind of reminds me of that motivation to want to capture the sound of a band and the energy in the right kind of way.
Absolutely. I think it's so important because, that's what, people talk about, like this music from the 60s and how it's so timeless and, music was just better then. It's like, I don't know if I agree with that, but I think what people are trying to express in some manner is that they're hearing the conviction. They're hearing the sweat a little bit. They're hearing like the commitment to the performance. And that's more what I take away from more modern music is I don't hear that level of like commitment all the way through because sort of in as being like in the back, behind the scenes, like, oh, we can just punch that in. Oh, we can just kind of edit that. Oh, we can comp that from like 800 takes and make it perfect. And so everybody just sort of like throws one out in the air and, throws it at the wall and we'll see what sticks and we'll make it great later. But back, the thing about all that classic music, 60s and 70s is like, all right, the tape is rolling. You better sing your ass off and like, and nail this one. And, there's just something about that. I think that is what's translating to people more than this just sounds perfect. This is quantized perfect. There's not a wrong note here because, one of my favorite singers of all time, Nina Simone, she's pitchy all over the place. Is it wrong? Not to me. It doesn't, it's not bad. It's exceptional. Is it pitch perfect? Absolutely not. But what's more important here? The conviction of her words and her message and her performance, or that she's like around the note a little bit?
Well, I mean, who invented that note anyway,
Yeah, right? Exactly. And it's just some arbitrary scale that we sort of all agreed on that it's like, oh yeah, these are the notes.
Yeah, a bunch of old white guys in dusty wigs, from 200, 300 years ago.
Right. And a piano player named Mike King, who I've had some pretty in-depth discussions with about pitch and tuning and stuff, he had this amazing concept that, because the world is starting to rotate faster, like 440 is no longer really relative, and we should all be tuning up to like 444 and this, that, I'm just like, that is really deep science, man. And I like that. But like, okay, I'm not going to change my piano to 444. Yeah.
You're like, I like that's deep science, dude. But how's your song, man? Come on, let's get down.
Yeah, and he's a genius and he's an incredible pianist. So, and sort of every instrument at this point, he's one of those kids who can just sort of sit behind anything and it's like, oh, okay, you just got it. You just have that thing that you understand music so deeply. Piano, drums, bass. It's like it doesn't really matter.
That's cool, man. Well, so tell us about Strange Weather Studios. I mean, we were talking about revamping studios. I'm in the process of redoing my studio, and you talked about, and I noticed that yours looks quite nice in the magazine cover, which that sounds reasonable. You'd probably make sure it looks pretty nice in a magazine cover, But you talked about the process of going through multiple studio iterations to get to a point you're at now. Tell us about your studio now. What have you got in there, and talk about the evolution of studio for you.
Okay, well, currently, Strange Weather is our single room facility in Brooklyn, New York. It's centered around a API legacy access console. We've got a set of nice Dyna Audio monitors. We've got both Pro Tools and a couple of Studer tape machines, loads of outboard gear, old tube and, crazy outboard gear.
I can even hear some genuine, authentic sirens in the background, man. I really feel like we're dialing into New York. It's awesome.
It hasn't really stopped. It's been a background noise we've all become very familiar with since, mid-March here in the city, which has been pretty tough. But no, it's very real here. You're getting it on a nice rainy day in New York City.
Awesome. Sometimes you just need a mic that will stand out in a mix. That's when you need the new BB29 Signature Series from Jay-Z Microphones. The unique single diaphragm Golden Drop capsule gives the BB29 airy highs and smooth mid-range to help your tracks stand at the front of your mix. Jay-Z's handcrafted, fully discreet microphones come with a 5-year warranty and free shipping to the US. You're hearing my voice on the BB29 right now. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 50% off the BB29 at jzmic.com. Well, so you have the API Legacy console, and you've got 2 Studer tape machines, really. So how often are you guys finding that tape is still part of the process for you?
Personally, for me, I'm not like using it all the time. I do mix down to the 1/2-inch machine quite often, and especially love it for the vari speed.
Yeah.
The vari speed element, like, just changing a song a little bit. I don't know, something about vari speed just has some magic to it, and it can fix things all of a sudden that you were like, didn't even realize with the pitch changing and everything. Like, I know it's strange and no one will be ever to play along with your song because it'll just be in some weird, step that's not into any tuning, but it can really just like do a special thing. So I find myself using the tape machine more of as a piece of outboard gear. I use it for doing vari speed or doing tape flanging effects or a slapback echo or a pre-delay before my plate reverb or something like that. more than I'm using it as a multi-track device. I mean, I'm happy to do that. I do appreciate the sound of tape and like the subtle compression that you get from tape. But, you know, with my process, I want things to happen really efficiently. I want things to happen kind of quickly. And I don't want to be, while the artist is in there sparking a great idea, I'm not going to say like, oh, hang on, let me like figure out this machine. It's being weird. Like, hold on, with the amount of technology and trickery and techniques, it's like we can get the sound we're after. I'm not so worried about finding the sound. I don't want to like miss the opportunity to capture what you're thinking. Yeah. So right. in that regard, I love the speed and the like sort of flow of using the computer, but then merging that with sort of the older sort of technology that makes things a little more tactile, makes things feel a little different, can really add some halo or special qualities to the audio that, you know, the plugins are just a little more safe. I'm not dissing plugins. I use them all the time. But to me, I feel like when I use the plugin, I'm doing something a little bit more subtly or a little more surgically. Mm-hmm. And when I use the outboard gear, I'm sort of like at the mercy of, you know, it's limited control, it's limited headroom. And I find those limitations to sort of be helpful in a way. We were talking about track counts earlier, and like, you know, limited track counts can be, you know, kind of counterintuitive in a way to help you solve a problem. And I sort of think about some of the outboard gear in that same sense, where it's like, this thing has one knob, turn it up or turn it down. It's not the right one. Try something else. Like, you know, I don't want to have to click through like 1,000 menus and hold on. I'm finding this thing. Hold on. Like, you know, let me try 80 other settings real quick and see if we can find the right one, you know. But in terms of the studio, you know, so that's current Strange Weather. And, you know, it's gone through I don't know how many, you know, revisions at this point of the studio, but it started many, many years ago in New Jersey as my rehearsal studio with my friends. And I slowly started moving the recording equipment in there. I had my first real piece was a Roland VS 1880 digital 18-track. I don't know if you guys remember that kind of stuff.
Yeah. We were doing band demos on that. And I knew a guy here in Nashville who could produce amazing sounding records on that.
So I got one of those machines because of an older friend of mine. You know, he had a band, and when I was looking at their CD, you know, this is 2001 or something like that, I'm like, wait, Richie, the credits on your record say that you recorded this. Like, this sounds really good. Like, what do you mean that you did this? You know? And he was like, yeah, come over to my house, I'll show you. And he showed me the 1880, and I was like, okay, I got to have this. Like, this is how you do it, you know? And Richie showed me sort of, you know, the approach of how to make records. And I thought, man, this thing just is the greatest. And to me, it wasn't a computer. You know, I didn't want to get Pro Tools. Everyone at the store was like, why are you buying this stupid thing? Get a computer and Pro Tools. And I'm like, no. I want to touch something. I want it to be in front of me. I want to like use a piece of equipment, you know. As a musician, when I was playing guitar, I was really into, I discovered pretty quickly, like, I like all these weird pedals. They make my guitar sound crazy, and they make my guitar sound different than a guitar. And I had a different pedal for each thing. I never wanted one of those like big zoom multi-effects things. I liked having each, you know, box have its own thing. I thought they were cooler. They sounded better. It was more unique. It added a unique quality to my sound. And that philosophy sort of always stuck with me, that like, be able to touch it, you know, sort of be specific about what you're going for. And, you know, that really hasn't left. So it, you know, went from 1880 to, you know, eventually I sort of caved in and bought a computer and had my first Pro Tools rig and a Soundcraft Ghost console. That was my first real, you know, desk. And started, you know, collecting pieces of outboard gear and mic preamps and things like that, all the way to the studio that you see today, which is just, you know, above and beyond my sort of wildest imagination. You know, I never thought Mix Magazine would say I have one of the greatest studios in New York City. That was just never that wasn't even on the bucket list. You know, that was never part of the plan. But to sort of have become that is just, really what they say is like, I'm living the dream here. It's just like, I wasn't prepared for it, but I'm very happy to be here and really appreciate it,
Well, I would go beyond too and suggest that a common theme I hear in your music is, not being afraid to go make music that you love. You know what I mean? And I think
100%.
that's a thing that we can all forget as we think about gear and studios and music careers and stuff like that. It's very easy to get pulled in directions that we think we might need to go, but it may or may not really excite us as far as the music goes. And it seems like, the stuff you've created, like you've allowed yourself to go in the direction of stuff that just is just genuinely exciting to you. Is that totally true? Or, do we need to reveal that you still had to go through a lot of wrong turns on this journey that you've been on? And do you want to talk about that in a sort of encouraging way for the rock stars who are trying to figure this out themselves?
Oh yeah, loads, man, loads of it. I have recorded children's off-Broadway theater. I have recorded like you name it. When I was getting started and I got my first internship at a studio, I just wanted to be in the studio. I wanted to be behind the board. I wanted to learn this equipment. I wanted to be in a studio. I don't care what's in front of me. I want to be the one doing it. So I learned this stuff. The beauty and sort of like position that I've sort of been able to land myself in now, I'm extremely fortunate, but it did not come without 10 years of cutting my teeth and just saying yes to every single thing. I'm running a studio. I have a massive overhead keeping a studio open in New York City. You've got to pay the bills. You've got to keep the place open to facilitate when those projects that you really care about and you really find exciting, now the studio is still there so that they can exist. So you're just always saying yes. You're always doing the work. And that's the beauty of the job. Is it fun every single second? Definitely not. But, you take the good with the bad, so to speak. And, it's about learning and it's about being, really it's about being the technician and making who's ever on the other side of the glass comfortable and excited. And at the end of the day, when they take home, now it's just, here are your files. But when it was a reel of tape or a CD or whatever, that they were leaving and having a great experience and thrilled with what was playing back when they drove home in their car or, put their headphones on at home.
That's great, man. I really appreciate that. And I completely agree that, the important thing is to just keep building your studio and your skills and your ability to capture the music, so that when the opportunity does come around to do something you really love, you're ready for it. That's sort of like the, what was that book? The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield, where he talks about, always going to the writing room and writing every day so that when inspiration does arrive, you're there to capture it. I feel like that's a theme you hear in songwriting a lot too. And it's just a good reminder that that's true of the studio and production as well, where it's like, you just need to be ready. Now, what about did you ever feel...
One little thought I just had there was that, when you're talking about always being ready, you'll also never fully know when you're going to learn something that will work again later, or you never know who you're working with that might show up again in your life later. So it's always, the approach is like A game all the time, positive attitude all the time, and make everybody excited about what's happening in the studio, because, that weird dilemma that happened on this weird session that was totally not fun is happening now on this thing that I'm really psyched about. I can solve the problem the same way. I can, move past this because I had this older experience when I wasn't having as much fun, but I now have the experience to know how to conquer this problem that we're facing in the studio today, or any version of that,
That's brilliant, dude. I completely agree with that. It's you will try some mic technique, or you'll hear something broken that sounds cool but not appropriate for the record that's not as exciting. But later, when you're doing the record that's really exciting, you remember that, like you're saying, and now all of a sudden you've got this new color in your palette.
Precisely. Yeah. Whether it's a recording technique or even just a personal technique, a big part of the job of being in the studio is people skills. Yes, it's about knowing how to put the mics in the right places and get the sounds right. But if you can't like communicate with the people and like make them comfortable, you're not going to get good takes. And if you're not getting good takes, you're not going to get a good sounding record, So I think that all of that stuff is really, really important to remember when you're in there behind the glass,
Awesome,
it's all
man.
part of it. It's all part of the job.
I love it. Tell us a little bit about, you've got the new studio set up. It's really gorgeous. You've got the API legacy console. What are some things that make you really smile that you've got a console to work with? I mean, why not just click around with the mouse and just stay in the computer the whole time?
Well, firstly, on a tracking session, when you just start pushing up the mics and it sounds, everyone's already smiling in the studio, you're halfway there. You know what I mean? You're already like, all right, well, that was cool. I didn't do anything yet. I just turned up the gain and pushed the fader up, but great. Everybody's psyched already. This is great. So like having a console like that at your fingertips where it's just like, it's a hot rod. The console sounds so good that it's helping you along the way. It's like the first time I used a real U47, I was like, wait a second, that's all you have to do? You just put up the U47 and it's that good? Well, yeah, because it is that good.
It's like hiring the right drummer.
Precisely. And down to every level of that, So then when you have every microphone and you have a, full band session, so you're using 24 mics or 35 microphones or whatever, and each one of those mics get to go through a really good preamp, a really good EQ, a really good signal path, a really nice output transformer. It's just like incrementally, every piece is that much better to start with. So then when you keep overdubbing or you go and start doing the mix, it's like, everything was optimally kind of captured. You didn't have to use that, oh man, we're out of good mic pre's and just use that Behringer thing for the, the toms. Well, then the toms don't really sound that good. Why? Well, because we ran out of good stuff for the toms. I've got the console right in front of me and it's got 32 API 212 mic pre's. It's like, those are great. I'm not really sweating it,
That's awesome.
I've got other flavors for when I want to change the flavor, but I'm not worried I'm running out of good channels.
I feel like also, pertinent to what we were talking about before, when every individual thing is sounding so good, you're more likely to catch those micro spaces in the sound later and respect them as you move forward with your production.
Yeah, precisely. And again, that goes back to listening to a great like hip hop track. They painstakingly dug through hundreds of records to find the hi-hat sound. Make sure it's important. Make sure that kick is important because there's only 4 elements in this track. You got your, basic, the beat, you've got kick, snare, hat, you have a bass line or some kind of low end thing happening, and then you got the rest of the sample. Like each one of these elements needs to be so strong that it can carry the whole song. So when you talk about having each element start out that great, it's like, maybe we don't need to put a bunch more stuff on this because it's already sounding so slamming. When it gets to this moment where we're sort of questioning things, like, let me just try turning up something that's already here. Nice. And see if that, and that like, if that brings back the excitement that we thought we were missing before we just like pile something on top of this.
A gold bar should be kept safe in a vault because it's valuable, but it could be replaced if it was ever lost. One of your songs or recordings, on the other hand, is worth more than gold because it's one of a kind. It's you, and if it was ever lost, it could never be replaced. So wouldn't you feel better knowing your music was safe? This is why I like to have a dedicated system drive, audio work drive, virtual instrument storage drive, cloud storage, and an extra large backup drive in my studio computer. And when I'm finished with the project, I move it onto a dedicated pair of external drives for archiving. Thanks to OWC, I can count on my drives being super fast, reliable, and secure so that I can work quickly and sleep soundly at night knowing my music is safe. I want your music to be safe too. Discover the best options for storage and backup for your studio from OWC at macsales.com/rockstars. Have you ever wished you could remove the click-track bleed from a singer's vocal mic, the sound of shuffling feet from a full choir, or clicking noises from the valves of an otherwise brilliant trumpet solo? These are just some of the incredible things I've been able to clean up, edit, or remove from a recording using the magic of iZotope RX. Great for mixing with a collection of plugins for your DAW to manage plosives, clicks, S's, noise, buzz, reverb, breaths, and even guitar fret squeaks with the set it and forget it simplicity that lets you focus on your creativity in the studio while you let iZotope handle the audio challenges. If you've ever wanted to truly feel like a magician in the studio, then iZotope RX is your magic wand. Go to iZotope.com/rockstars in the show notes and use the code ROCK10 to get an additional 10% off your first purchase. Hey Rockstars, we're back now for the second half of the show. My guest today is Daniel Schlett, joining us from Strange Weather Studio in Brooklyn, New York. Daniel, are you ready to jam, man?
Always.
Good. I don't really know what it means when I say that on the back half of the show, but you got to say something, right? So,
oh yeah,
we're going to jam now. Dude, you've done some really amazing records. Let me just start talking to you about some of these because such a great collection that I put together in the playlist, which Rockstars, a reminder, you can find that in the show notes. Go listen to these records. Janka Nabe and the Boo Boo Gang, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Janka Nabe.
Janka Nabe. Okay, great. So it's just like really awesome up-tempo Afro pop. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about that. What's the story behind that record? And what is it with you and your love of African, Afropop? I guess that's the only word I can come up with to describe it.
Well, this is a two-part question here, but my love for that really began as a young teenager. I would hang out at a record store near my house growing up, and I was very fortunate to make friendly with the staff there, and they would put me on to all kinds of interesting music. And, I discovered Fela Kuti that way and really, really loved that music so much. And it really got me into buying like compilations and, Nigerian funk special from the 70s and all this kind of stuff. And the thing that just excited me so much about it was like how wacky some of the mixes were and like how groovy and groove based the music was. But, the synthesizer would come in and it would basically duck half the song because it was just so loud. And things were just really wild and distorted. And I just thought, man, this is so exciting sounding, and the playing is just off the charts. And like, man, this stuff is just so cool. And, really opened my ears to that sort of sound. And, this is maybe 2012 or something like that. I'm walking down the street at South by Southwest Festival, and I hear this sort of sound coming out of some, speakers down the street, and I'm getting closer and closer, and I finally get to the show, and I'm like, this is the band that I've been looking for. They're sort of a modern version of this, West African up-tempo sort of music, but they don't sound exactly like Fela Kuti. And, I don't know if you've heard, but there is a sort of version of this Afrobeat scene where it's just like, man, we heard all these riffs already. We heard all these grooves already. We've heard this band where it's like, the horn section and the same sort of like drummers and percussionists playing the same sort of grooves. And I thought, well, here's finally like a new version of that. I haven't heard this yet. And I just was so excited. I had to track them down. I didn't get to talk to them at the show, but I found out afterwards that they lived in New York and they were all in New York. And so I hunted them down and I said, we've got to do some music together. And we made a couple tracks and got them over to David Byrne at Luaka Bop, and he really loved the music.
Nice.
And so we got a deal with them and made a couple records with Luaka Bop, which was super fun. Janka has passed away since I think it was maybe last year or the year before, 2 years ago now. But, being able to work with him and learn from him and share all those experiences with him was just some of the best stuff that I have ever been a part of. And I'm so happy that you got to hear that music and responded so positively to it, because it's just so important to me. And I really, really love that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been a fan of African music. It's funny because if you just say African music, there's a part of me that automatically thinks like field recording, but there's like you said, there's been so much studio music happening, going all the way back to the 1970s. And I completely agree with you. Like the strangest, boldest, electronic drum choices, but they weren't a drum machine, things like that. Or, Thomas Mapfumo was one of the artists that I first discovered, a Nigerian artist. And I used to love the ways that the drum fills would happen, and they'd cross over the bar and kind of crash on the two of the next bar. And
it's amazing.
Yeah. And so that's cool that you're doing that stuff. Let's see, there's also another artist that you worked with. I also got a chance to record at my Bonnaroo Hay Bale studio back in, I think it was 2015, a Songhoy Blues from Mali. Talk about that, because those guys have an amazing sound, and yet the production that you did, Badala, if I'm pronouncing that right, is just some, balls out rock music that sounds like, it might have come from Third Man Records or whatever. It just sounds like very modern, great rock music.
Well, I can't take all the credit there, because that record was really produced by Matt Sweeney from Chavez and countless other great groups. And Matt is an exceptional producer. So we worked on that one together. And the real goal behind that album was, when you see this band live, your face gets melted. They are so electrifying live. And we haven't heard that record from that band yet. We haven't heard that sort of super explosive, tear your face off sort of feeling from the records, because they always seem to sort of get nice. They always sort of seem to just get nice and well recorded. And, they're a scrappy street band from a tough town. Let's keep some of that in what we're doing here. Let's make sure that element is not, to use the term, like whitewashed out of this. Let's make sure that this stays sort of authentic to where these guys are coming from and how it sounds when they play in Bamako. They're playing out of whatever amps they can get their hands on. The PA could be, who knows what, and it's blown out and it's loud and it's aggressive and it sounds wild. So we just kept pushing them to, up the gain and up the tempo and, play, smile more while you're playing, jump around more while you're playing. I remember Matt being in the studio with them, like literally jumping around the live room while they're playing to just like make them laugh and make them be excited. And it was like 100% effective, in my opinion.
That's great. There's also a quality to it where, the drums are really crisp and bright in just the right kind of way. And I know that can be really hard to do sometimes when you're doing rock stuff. Sometimes when I start blowing out the sound of the band, I get to the mixing and I feel like I can't get the detail back out of the drums. Do you have any recollection of some of the things that you guys were able to do to make sure that all those, the clarity and the snares and the drum fills were still there later?
Oh, sure. Again, we talked about micro spaces and things like that. And I find that, I feel like people go like, yeah, you want to make it sound crazy, run it through the compressor and turn it all the way up. And that's how you make things sound crazy. You hit all the buttons on the 1176 and things get crazy.
Right.
And that's all true. But you want to retain that punchiness and you want to retain that sort of detail. Use a gate. Go the other direction. The gate is actually making things more dynamic by accentuating the spaces between the beats. Because when you start doing all that compression, you get that sort of buildup underneath in low frequency that just sort of mushes over everything and smears all the transients in between the hits. So to go back and sort of, you know, highlight those transients and highlight the sort of punchiness again and blend it back with the totally destructed, you know, square wave drum tracks that you have, that's where I sort of feel like that's where you regain that sort of power back in the drums and the detail.
So that would mean having sort of the raw tracks before they're processed, kept making sure you capture those so that you can treat them later, where it's like you're either blasting them out or you're gating them and making them these individual, you know, punchy samples almost.
Exactly. Yeah. And so certain mics, like maybe you're using like a center of the kit mic and that's smashed, or the room mics are blown out, but then you still have your close mics and you're blending those close mics in back to the sort of like bigger drum sound that you already got. You know, one of the things I have also learned through this is like, you don't need all those mics all the time. So when I've worked with certain artists and they're really, you know, they really want to strip it down and have it be one mic on the drums, you can get the sound of the drum set with one mic. You can get a balanced, good drum sound with that one mic. So if you can start there and sort of build your sound and get the sound of the drums happening, then those close mics become like your attack mics. They become like the punchy mics, and you blend those in and your sort of drum set becomes more focused somehow. I don't know if I'm explaining that clearly enough, but you have sort of the sound of the drums coming from certain mics, and then you have your punch and your detail coming from the close mics, because they're like spot mics. If you think of an orchestra, you've got the big, you know, decketry above the orchestra, and then you see spot mics on the individual instruments. When you go to mix that orchestra, you're starting with the decketry, you're starting with the big picture, and then you're going, I want a little bit more of the woodwinds, and you start to blend in the woodwind mics for the detail, or you blend in the violin mics for the detail. You don't start with the close mics.
Yeah, I think the detail, that's like the key phrase there too, right? Because if you imagine, you know, if you were talking to me right now, and obviously we're doing this over the internet, but if I was in a room with you and I stood across the room, I'd hear you talking. But if I brought my ear real close to your voice, I'd hear all the detail of your voice, you know, and it's like, that's probably the thing that's so key to capture from those close mics and the drums is like the stick hitting the drum and all just that initial attack kind of detail, which is probably why gating those can work so well too.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think that, you know, in reality, when you're watching a band on the stage, your ear is not like an inch from the hi-hat or the snare drum. You're standing 25 feet back from the drum set and hearing the drum set. So I'm using those close mics as detailed and spot mics mostly. You know, that's sort of my approach to those close mics.
Yeah, but you brought up, you made a comment about a certain mic. You called it the center of the kit mic. And that's one of those ones that I hate to admit it, but I feel like it's taken me 30 years of recording to discover or rediscover. So I want to ask you to describe what that is, but also I want us to remember that the drummer's head is kind of almost like a center of the kit mic in a way. And the drummer's head is probably like the closest thing to hearing the details as they hit the drums. So that's what maybe a reason why you need a mic that gets that kind of perspective on the drum kit, even though you need that mic that's further from the drum kit that gets the perspective of somebody who's standing back and listening to the whole drum performance.
Right. Well, and again, part of making records, you know, I call it like movie magic. You know, it's an illusion. You're creating an illusion. The band isn't there. The band might have not even played this in the same country at the same time. Like, you know, we're making movie magic with making records, and you're creating the illusion of a space. You're creating the illusion of dynamics. You're making things larger than they were, or you know, like you're making it more dynamic than it was, or, you know, when you add a special effect, like it's not to like highlight the effect, it's to highlight the way the person sang something or the drummer hit something. Like, you know, it makes it more impactful. So you're using those effects sort of in that manner. For me, when we talk about that center of the kit mic, I'm not placing it up by the drummer's head. I'm actually placing it sort of, if you can sort of picture the drum set, right? You've got your kick drum, your snare set, you know, like sort of off, if we're talking about a right-handed trap kit here, the snare drum's just a little bit left of center. You've got your rack tom in front of that and your floor tom over to the right. That center mic is sort of sneaking in under the ride cymbal, above the kick drum, between the two toms, pointing at the snare drum.
Mm-hmm.
If that sort of makes sense, like if I can paint that picture in your mind, the mic is sort of angled in, pointing towards the side of the snare, but back a bit, and it's sort of in between the two toms and sort of above the kick drum. And when you listen to that mic, it was like you said, it took you 30 years to discover or rediscover that. When I first sort of saw that trick and always thought like, well, what the heck does that do? And put the mic there and listened to it for myself, I was like, well, damn, that's the whole kit. That's everything sounds good in this mic.
Yeah, and the cymbals don't sound bad almost.
No, the cymbals are not overpowering. The drums feel close and punchy. I can hear the difference between the toms. I'm getting the image that I'm looking for here, and it sounds balanced. You might have to move the mic up an inch to get a little less kick, or move the mic to the left a little bit to get a little bit more of the rack tom, and do that first. Balance the kit inside that mic. Balance the kit in there first. If that's not really balanced and it's and it's all floor tom rumble, well, that's what you're going to get later, and then you're going to just be trying to EQ out like 60 hertz or 70 hertz to try to get this like rumble out all the time. Start there with that mic and get a balanced sound, and then start to bring in the rest of whatever you added, whether that be a front of kick mic or a snare top and bottom or a hi-hat mic, whatever, and then you blend it to taste. What do you feel like you're missing a little bit of? A little bit of sizzle out of the snare drums, or you're missing a little bit of a clicky attack out of the kick drum. Okay, well then you make sure that the kick mic is filling in that gap for you. You make sure the snare mics are filling in that gap for you, sort of more than just starting with all those close mics and then trying to find some sort of ambience or blend that just isn't natural. I liken it to when you look at an image with a camera lens. The camera lens creates a focal point, and then it creates depth by showing you things are out of focus, whether they're in front or behind that image. When you see a green screen and you see that the background is in focus because that green screen image was captured in focus, and then the person standing in front of that green screen is also in focus, your eye and your brain immediately recognize something is not right here. This is not natural. There's no depth perception here. And I see that this looks one-dimensional now. I sort of also feel like you get a little bit of that inconsistency when you're using all these mics because they're pointed in a million directions. You're sort of creating this phase nightmare that your brain can't really comprehend, and it doesn't necessarily help with adding depth. And depth is one of those things that really makes a B plus mix turn to an A plus mix. To sort of use a poor term there, but adding that sense of space where the drum set is just behind the singer, and this thing is behind the drum set now. You can feel where these things are in a space. That's the illusion now that we've created. I find that sort of not having all those mics be open all the time eliminates some of that confusion or phase misalignment that turns into sort of your brain being like, something's not right here. Something doesn't feel right.
I love the way you describe that. It's like we do. It's a common experience to learn, quote, the right way to mic up a drum kit first, like what they would have taught me in school. It's like, put all your mics on it, then you might got some stereo room mics, and then you got that and whatever.
Yeah.
And then you do all these things, and you're sort of proud of yourself for getting a clean signal on each one to tape or whatever. And then you listen to it, and you go through this experience. You're like, now I need to sort of discover the drum sound inside these mics. And I like the way you described it, where it's like, fuck that. Just start by, start with something that mostly makes sense on its own as a single mic, like a really good photograph of something, and then start figuring out, like, intentionally, what do I still need in this sound, and add a mic intentionally.
Absolutely. And the funny part is, through this sort of rediscovery process of like changing the, again, I learned the same way you just described. Kick in, kick out, snare top, snare bottom, blah, 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 all the way down the line. And you got 12 microphones on a drum set. When you start with the single mic approach, or, the minimal mic approach, like if you're doing an Al Green thing, there's 2 mics on that drum set for all those records. It's 2 RCA 77s and it sounds amazing.
Wow.
When you start with that minimal miking approach, then you realize why you got to 12 mics in the first place. Because those overheads are just supposed to be capturing maybe the air element of the drum set, or these room mics are going to be capturing this element of the drum set, or depth that we're looking for to sort of create the illusion that this is in a big stadium or in a big empty warehouse, because that sounds like scary or something, but you realize why. And you have, like you said, some intent behind each one of those microphones before you're just lost in the maze of like, well, how do I get this to sound cool? Because at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're just trying to make it as exciting and ear-catching as possible, not correct. There's no version of correct.
Yeah, when I was learning from my mentors, Brad Jones over at Alex the Great Recording here in Berry Hill in Nashville, and we used to have a mic and we just called it Rover, and it was like a Shure SM81, and its job was we just move it around to whatever thing we still needed, in the production. And that was sort of my first introduction to that idea, which is great advice from you. Just do it intentionally. When you're starting,
I've made entire records that way. Set up a mic and then just move it around the room.
That's great. I did one song production for an artist here, Will Kimbrough, where we put one mic on a stand and we didn't move the mic. So he sat and sang in front of the mic, and then he stepped back with his guitar amp and performed over here. And then he sat back at the piano and performed. And I wouldn't say it was total magic, but it was a lot of fun to try and produce a song that way. Don't move the mic at all.
Right. I mean, tons and tons of great records were made that way. Like if we go all the way back to the Bing Crosby's and, the names are all just evaporating from my brain. But
I know what you mean. You picture the singer in the big RCA 44 and the band is just around in the room around that mic.
Right. And you move the person closer. Like, hey, I'm not getting enough of this acoustic guitar. Move your chair up, or hey, that trombone is too loud. Step back 5 feet, And that's something that I've always tried to do, especially, like I've worked with this group, Teen, who was a band of sisters, and they naturally would just sing so well together when they did harmonies that it was like, we got to capture this, So I would just use a stereo mic with them and go, okay, Teeny, step a little bit more to the left. Lizzie, move up an inch because she's a little quieter, and blend it right into the mic. And it just would always come out better. They would have a better time singing. They would sing better together. It would sort of encourage them all to blend better, naturally blend. I just always thought that was a great approach. And sort of, you have to trust the tried and true methods to some degree. Like, I remember when I was learning and interning at a studio, my sort of mentor at that time was always using the distressor and had it set one way for every single thing. And I was like, well, all these old compressors were really slow and like the needles move really slow. Like, that can't be all bad, right? Like, and he's like, no, you want the compression to go away really quickly. And I'm like, but like the Fairchild is slow as hell. Like, you're telling me that's not good? Like, I don't understand what you mean by this.
It sure is expensive for a bad compressor.
Right. That's what I'm like, wait a second. But everybody says this is the best thing ever. How is that not correct? Because it's slow. Well, sometimes you need things that are slow and sometimes you need things that are fast, and everybody has their appropriate job, but it's like, it can't just be wrong because of that, you know?
Yeah, I think
and some of these older things were like, well, they had it right. You know, they did have it. They figured it out.
Yeah, I think it was Richard Dodd when he was on the podcast talking about compression settings, and I might have misheard it, but it was, you know, I think he was talking about like a really fast attack and a really slow release, and like 20-1 on an 1176. And I remember thinking like, shit, I never set it up like that. Like what, like when would we want to use that? And it's such a great reminder. It's like there is this whole variety of sounds, and you know, break your own rules. You know, if you've been using 4-1 with a slow attack and a fast release all the time, go the opposite. Start recording that way, and be surprised at how good things can still sound.
Oh yeah, I mean, slowing down the compressors was a huge like eye opener for me, and you know, being able to hear what the compression was doing. I never understood what people mean, like, oh, you got to set the attack and release for the tempo of your song and this and that. And I'm like, man, what are these guys talking about? Like, you said it fast and it makes everything sound awesome. You know, like you hit all buttons in and set both of the dials to fast, and it just gets crazy. Like, What do you mean? Like, you know, get it to in between the kicks and this and that, you know? And I was like, oh, that's what they mean. That, and it starts to really shape the sound. And again, you know, part of the approach too, and we haven't really touched on this, but part of the approach is like, when you start mixing, like, turn all the tracks on. Start with the whole picture. Like starting with that, you know, all right, let's turn up the kick and get the kick sounding good. It's like, you are going to just chase your tail for the rest of the day. And, you know, if you don't have any sort of time restrictions, maybe you'll be chasing your tail for months on that mix. But if you just sort of go for the whole approach, you'll make these decisions with a little bit more intention and a little bit more accuracy when you're hearing in context what you're going for. And when you slow down that compressor on the kick drum, like, oh, it got tighter. Oh, cool. I'm not getting this like bloom after the note where it's just filling up space that I didn't want.
Yeah. So we can finish up on this one mic idea, but you know, when you're talking about the one mic to start with your drums, do we need to talk about, make sure people understand that you may want to have a compressor as part of that equation, or can you sometimes do the one mic thing with no compressor at all and get a killer one mic, you know, center kit thing?
Oh, I would almost say start with no compression. You know, get the mic sounding good. The mic will be good. You know, use a good mic.
Play a good drum part.
Say again?
Play a good drum part.
Right. And, you know, all that comes down to like, you know, can the drummer play balanced? If you tell the kid who's playing drums, like, hey, can you hit the hi-hats a little quieter? If he's able to do that, you know, you're working with, you know, a good team now. You guys can make this work together. Sometimes that's not, you know, and that's where you need, okay, well, I'm going to have to get some close mics in there so I can get rid of some of these cymbals because he's bashing on the cymbals so hard and I'm not getting the toms, you know?
Yeah.
That's where you need to like figure out those other techniques. But if you can start, you know, with a decent drummer, tune up the drums good. One of the things I love to do is start by tuning the drums to the key of the song. I find that is a massive help in resonance, and, you know, you're getting rid of beating between low frequency notes, which is where lots of problems come in. You know, you don't want those long tom decays blurring the notes when the bass player is doing a walk up at the same time. At least if they're relative to each other and you're in the right key, when he hits the tom and he hits a bass note, there's going to be some harmony there. There's going to be some blending naturally instead of just like two sour notes clashing in the low end, which we all know doesn't sound good.
Yeah. There's not a whole lot of room down there. You got to be selective, right?
Exactly. And I found that, you know, like getting the drums to sit well and be in tune, the whole thing just starts to sing a little better. And again, we're trying to get it all to sing out of the speakers as one unified sound at the end of the mix. So these are all little steps, incremental steps that help you get at the end of the track. Wow, this is sounding really big and glued together. Like, you know, people talk about a lot of 808s and this and stuff. And, you know, everybody wants 808s in their track. It's like, you can't just pick some random frequency and call it an 808. It's like the 808's in tune. It's part of the bass line. It's in the key of the song.
It is a bass line in a lot of hip hop, right? There isn't even necessarily a bass in there sometimes.
Exactly. So it's like you're moving those notes around, but they're in some sort of relative key, and they're helping move the song along. You might not even realize it, but trust me, it's happening, you know?
Bill Cheney, the founder of Spectra 1964, kept getting the same question from customers. What DI should they use with the 610 series comp limiters? After trying to recommend various DIs while making excuses for the way they all sounded, he realized that the solution was to create the perfect direct input box himself. Thus, the BBDI passive direct box from Spectra 1964 was born. By using Spectra design concepts and standards, the BBDI provides a low distortion and flat response design that is unequaled by any standard or measure. The absence of harmonic distortion and articulation of signal detail is readily apparent. This is all done with a passive transformer type design that will provide years of trouble-free operation. Simply put, the BBDI is the best sounding bass DI I've ever used. It'll move your pant leg. No hype, no color, just pure tone at Spectra1964.com. If your goal was to climb Mount Everest, you would hire a Sherpa to guide you to the summit. If you wanted to sail around the world, you would hire a seasoned sea captain for a safe voyage. And if you wanted to try skydiving, you wouldn't just jump out of an airplane without being strapped to an expert, right? So why would you send off your mix for mastering without knowing that it was ready first? Wouldn't it be great to have a professional mastering engineer with a trained ear to guide you through the final stages of mixing? Brian Murphy is your trusted guide at soundporter.com. Home of the iterative mastering process, where you get to interact with a professional mastering engineer who listens to what you want and will give you mix feedback to help you get your mix ready for mastering. Contact Brian now for a free mix review and mastering demo so that you can hear it before you buy it at soundporter.com. So give us, if it's possible, give us some tips about how to begin with experimenting with tuning the drums to the key of the song. I mean, are we busting out I'm going to ask the dumb question here. Do we bust out our iPhone guitar tuner and point it at the drums and hit the drum? You know?
No. You have your friend sit at the piano and you ask the songwriter, hey, what key is this song in? And they say, it's in D. So you tune your bass drum to the lowest D that you can get it, so that it's like the D is like in the key, you know, kick drum is rooting the song.
And it's kind of the sustain of the drum is what you would hear as the note, right?
Yes, exactly. And you're just going around and you're finding sort of, you know, it doesn't always work. You know, the high tom is going to be the third. The low tom is always going to be the fifth. It doesn't work that way. You got to find where the drum wants to sit, and you find the notes in the chord that are going to work and with the song. You know, I have a song, if you guys want to go and listen to a song by a group called Amen Dunes. The song is called Everybody's Crazy, and the bass line is the drums. The drummer, Parker Kindred, tuned up the toms and tuned up the whole drum set and played the bass line with the toms. And my mind was literally blown. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to happen every time. I'm going to do this every time now. And it just really clicked for me that like, oh man, this is super important. You got to have the drums in tune.
That's awesome, man. I'll make sure to add that to the playlist. And then it just reminds me of the comment you made about miking. It's like, what do you want in the song? Find the mic and the placement to add that element to the production or the song. Instead of just starting with the drums and then wondering why they don't sound good later, how can I get these to sound good? Start with the intention of knowing what the song is, what key it's in, create the drum kit that goes with that song, you know?
Yeah, I have never been a fan of the approach of like the band comes in and we're cutting drums for the first 3 days to a click track. Like, I don't understand that approach, because what are these drums relative to? This drum set sounds good, but in context to what?
Right.
Like, it's to me, it's like we're making the song come alive. What drums are supposed to be in the song? What, you know, how can we just like, I mean, obviously I know certain groups, they done a lot of pre-production and rehearsals and they've figured out all their parts. But for me as the engineer, it's like, I need to have some sense of context to help you guys get to the finish line here. And I can't really tell like if this is the right, sound, if I can't have any sort of like context of what's going to be playing along with this drum set. If the toms are too long, what else is happening? Is it masking something else? I don't know yet. Do I need to dampen them more? Do I need to open them up more? Should this be mallets? Should we change the cymbal? Like, there's a drum set is so complicated because there's so many pieces to a drum set. It's not a single one instrument. It's a bunch of instruments. If we talked about Janka Nabe earlier, the traditional form of boo-boo music is the band is 20 people and each person is doing one thing in the band. There's a guy who plays the bass drum. There's a guy who plays this percussion element. Typically that music is made with a group of flute players. Each flute is one note and they play the melody as a group and in a sequence together. So it's like the drum set becomes complicated because there's so many pieces to it. But again, it really helps me with having some sort of intention behind, like, why did we pick these hi-hats? Why did we pick this sizzle ride? Why did we use the wood snare over the brass snare today? All of those things help, but you need some sort of context.
That's great, man. I love that. And I've done some production where we broke up the kick and the snare groove. And I remember immediately being struck, and I've said this on the podcast before, but if a drummer plays a kit and they play the kick and the snare, you get one kind of groove. But if you make them break it up and play each one individually, it makes the groove sound rubber bandy in a cool way. It gets it real slinky sounding, I thought.
Oh, that's cool. That's like, what's his name? From the band with Roy Orbison and George Harrison. Jeff Lynne, right? That was Jeff Lynne's approach, like really isolate all the drums.
Oh, interesting. No, I didn't know that.
The Wheelberries. There you go.
Yeah,
the traveling
Wheelberries.
That was his approach, really like we're just gonna record the kick drum now. We're just gonna record the hi-hat now. That sort of thing. And I've done things like that too, especially when the production calls and it's like, okay, I'm gonna be the drummer today. I'm no drummer. I'm gonna put the beat together like I know how. Okay, here's the hi-hat part.
Yeah. Yeah,
I don't have that ambidextrous quality that I can just like rip a drum set and like nail it every time.
Well, I mean, if you do separate cymbals from the rest of the drums, then at least you don't have this, too much cymbals in the drum mics problem.
Right.
I've heard of rock bands doing that in the studio too.
Oh, sure. But then, if you want to go for like that Tame Impala where like every crash cymbal is like a bloom, it's like that only happens when the cymbals are bleeding into the kick mic.
Yeah.
And
with
it's like,
a slow release on the compressor.
Thank you. Slow it down.
Slow it down, man. All right, so let's keep, at the risk of not mentioning enough of the cool things you've done, tell us about working with Steve Gunn. There's a song called New Moon in the playlist. Really cool sound. How'd you approach that production or that recording session?
Well, so that record was really, really wonderful to make. The band on that record is just phenomenal. And Steve came to me saying like, the last couple times I've recorded, I've sort of just felt like we did this piling up of tracks and we really just, lost the thread by the end. There's just so much stuff happening. I really want to just try to focus the record about like my guitar playing and my song and like make sure that that's the element that stands out first before we just worry about like noodling guitars all over the place. Mm-hmm. And so we sort of decided very early on that this was going to be a band playing in a room and we're going to, have him sing and play the keeper guitar and vocal. And that's how we're going to, make the record. It's going to be based off of his performance. And I think that was really the secret there. The next real element is when I had just recently met Tony Garnier, the bass player, and thought, this guy is, pretty incredible bass player, and his depth of knowledge about how music works is going to be massively helpful to us in the studio when we're cutting these tracks live. And it was a perfect match. I think Steve and Tony just really got on super, super well. Their chemistry on that song and another song called, it's going to elude me now. I'll try and remember it, but it's just a duet of them on the record together. acoustic guitar, voice, and bass. And it's just so, so powerful to hear the sort of interlocking thing that they had together in the room.
That's cool. So this would be, in this situation, you would try and capture the vocal and the guitar performance at once. Is it, when you do that, and that this is pertinent to another session you shared as well, which was a Nick Hakim, the Needy Bees. It's a live performance, and it's just that, like, you know, how do you capture live vocal and live guitar or live piano all at the same time? And, you know, what do we do if we need to replace anything?
Okay, well, it does get a little tricky when you have to start worrying about punching in and finessing the magic, so to speak. There are tricks, you know, you can blast some bleed back out into the room. That always sort of helps smear the line a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that I will always sort of stand by, and that I learned from working with Here We Go Magic and Nigel Godrich, was just sort of, if you just do it, it'll most often work. Like if you make a crazy tape edit, it's just going to work somehow. And so, like, yeah, you know, we had to punch in certain things and we had to fix things and nudge things around. And you just sort of have the faith in the process, and it'll be fine. You know, I just recently was listening to the song by the Delphonics, La 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 Means I Love You. I probably heard that song 1,000 times. There's a massive tape edit right at the top of the second verse. The vocal is completely cut in the middle of a word. It's just like, you know, it's a horrible tape edit. I didn't notice it for 15 years.
That's great.
It's totally fine. It's like, the song is great. Keep it moving. Like, oh, we got to punch something in? Punch it in. You know, like, sometimes you got to get the whole band to punch it in together. You know, you just figure it out.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like I can't think of all the names, but there are a lot of classic rock, you know, hits from Pink Floyd to the Eagles to whatever, where when you look close, you're like, shit, that whole outro is just like a tape edit. They just, like, the reverb just got chopped off completely right there. They just completely just pasted that on there. And I almost think what you're saying might be that, like, you know, as long as a move is bold and intentional, it's probably going to work because it's going to be interpreted as a musical decision, you know?
Always. Yeah. They weren't in the room. They didn't know what happened. It's just like, this is kind of what the listener was presented with, and they have to believe that you meant that. And oftentimes you did, you know? And it's funny you mentioned that Needy Bees live performance. There's a little like Easter egg in that song. If you really listen closely, you know, Nick loves a very sort of saturated and treated vocal sound. So there's a good deal of like slap echo and an old spring reverb that I used on him for that session. And if you listen closely, you'll notice that there's a lot of that reverb on the snare drum in the beginning of the track. And that's all coming through the vocal mic. And the moment that he starts singing, the snare drum reverb goes completely away.
Because the compression kicks in.
Exactly. And I just think that is like, you know, that's part of it. That's cool. Like, play into that effect. Don't think of it as a problem. Think of it as like a little feature. And so the snare, you know, like something that RZA would always do is like change the snares in the track. You know, the snare drum is like, on these beats, it's this sound. And on these beats, it's another sound. And I always loved that he would do these wacky things in the production. And when you listen to that track, you know, the snare has some movement now. I didn't have to do it with the fader, or I didn't have to automate any effect on and off. It just kind of happened naturally in the arrangement. And, you know, when you can build a system for the arrangement, things sort of come together in a more natural and cohesive way right away.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that reminds me of a couple of things. I was just in the studio tracking with my band, and, you know, the drummer accidentally started the song and his snares were off and he hit it, and it was just that open bong snare drum sound. And his first instinct was like, oh, whoops, hold on, we got to bail on that. That was, I forgot to have the snares on. And I was like, dude, that sounded amazing, you know? So then we quickly rearranged the song where he just played it with no snares on at the beginning and then flips them on before the first verse or whatever, or the chorus. And just little things like that can make such a difference. But
and that sounds to me like a natural dynamic shift all of a sudden, because it goes from this mellow sound in the beginning and the verse, and then boom, at the chorus, we get this snappy big snare.
Yeah, exactly.
You didn't have to do any creative tricks. You didn't have to recontextualize how the chorus works. It's just like, boom, the snare's on, and it's more happening. Something exciting just happened.
Yeah. And, in that session, we used the center of kit mic, and I got a new thing going that I had totally discovered on another session, like you were talking about, and everything was coming together really nicely. And I had that classic experience where we recorded a lot in a weekend, and a lot of great choices and intention in the initial part of the process resulted in really fast mixes. And then those really fast mixes sounded as good or better than listening to a project I had done where I had, spent ages and ages perfecting everything and tons of layers and all kinds of fancy mixing. And I'm sure you've experienced that too. It can be both frustrating and encouraging,
Absolutely. I remember working when I was still coming up as a young engineer and still doing a lot of assisting work at the studios. I worked with a producer named Rafael Colon, and the band would come in from the tracking room. Everybody's high-fiving. They're all excited. They just did a great take. He would print the mix right there. That was the mix. Boom. We're done with this song. Moving on. That guy never got any revisions. That guy never got mix notes. I was like, damn, he captured everybody's intention and everybody's good memories and good vibes. And when they listen back to that recording, they're hearing that. They're hearing the great time that they had. They're hearing the awesome experience that they had. And they're not going, oh, I don't know, maybe like a half dB less of this. And it's like,
come on,
it's
man.
Just that's the arbitrary stuff, man.
Let's be honest. Let's be honest, dude. We're talking about 0.1 dB because you can in Pro Tools. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's part of it comes back to philosophy of the stuff more than the technique. It's like, man, we got to get back to just making this exciting and where's the intention behind this before we worry about the perfection of this and before we worry about the idiosyncratic minutia of oh, did I use this at 1 dB? It's like, I don't know, man. Who cares? It's like nobody hears 1 dB. They hear if it got cool or not. I recently sort of discovered, I know it's an obvious one, but listening to Peter Gabriel's So album, it's man, the fader moves, the master fader moves on those mixes are radical. It's just the song just got 6 dB louder, and then it got 6 dB quieter on the next part. You can hear them moving the master fader of the console. It's just okay, that was bold, that was cool. It wasn't push this up a touch here. It's no, we want the chorus to be loud. Boom, the chorus is loud now.
That's great, man. That's great. And another New Jerseyan, Roger Mutno, who's now here in Nashville, who also owned a Ghost console, just like you did. He taught me a lesson years ago where he said, these little moves, don't forget little moves. If you want to do something, make a bold move, 3 dB at least, whatever. It's just if you're going to, the greatest mixes have really strong differences between elements in them, not like a nice, general gray in the middle.
Yeah, nobody wants gray, but there is, you can't forget about details too. They are important. And I'm not trying to say throw caution to the wind here. Working with engineers like Chris Shaw and mixing things with him, watching him, how he does fader rides and watching how he would mix the band and ride the fader through each moment of the song and create these subtle dynamic changes for intention. So again, it just came back to remembering why am I doing this? You don't just ride the fader arbitrarily and turn it up and down. That's not what he was doing, but he was creating this finesse between the movement of the song that I learned was wow, that's super, super important. And he'd go back and bump a word or bump the end of a phrase or something. And it was okay, so it's not that details aren't important, but let's focus on the big picture first and then worry about the detailed stuff a little bit later,
Yeah, that's great.
And I really appreciated learning that sort of approach that he had, and watching him in the studio and, kind of developing that from sort of watching him,
Yeah, Chris is awesome. And you guys are now podcast mates because he was a great guest as well.
He's just phenomenal, man. And he's an amazing storyteller. I hope you got some good gems from him on that episode.
We got some really good ones. And I've heard him tell stories before that can't be shared on this podcast, but were also great stories. He's definitely been there and seen all kinds of cool stuff.
Oh yeah. He's lived a wild life.
The secret to a great mix is to start with great source tracks. And this means you need great microphones. JZ Mics in Riga, Latvia brings you the new BB29 Signature Series microphone to help your recordings add clarity and detail to your mixes. At the heart of JZ microphones is the unique Golden Drop capsule design with a lighter, faster diaphragm that delivers great clarity and fidelity without distracting colorations and distortions. The new BB29 microphone has a Class A discrete amplifier circuit, extremely low self-noise, and transformer-coupled output to bring an expensive sound to your studio for an affordable price. JZ offers a 5-year warranty, free shipping to the US, and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Plus, for a limited time, you can use the coupon code ROCKSTARS to get 50% off the BB29 at jzmic.com. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a Nashville session drummer and a Grammy-winning studio. Want to start mastering your own records? Rockstars of Mastering walks you through exactly how I mastered my own record using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. Want to learn how to create a mix that doesn't suck but rocks instead? At Mixmaster Bundle, I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins so that you can have punchy, powerful drums, guitars that rock, bass you can feel, and a mix that is in your face. Plus, it's totally free as my way of saying thanks for listening. Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now and look for the clickable link in the show notes below. So let's talk about some other artists you work with. Mr. Twin Sister, that's a great one. You mentioned David Byrne, and for some reason that particular band and production kind of reminded me of a Talking Heads appreciation to what a song could be. And it's a great video with all these women dancing in blue leotards and stuff.
They're just a phenomenal group. They have such a cool demeanor about them. They're like maybe one of the most laid back bands. They're ultra patient. They know what they want. And, for them to like ask me to work with them, I was, flattered. I'm like, man, you guys are just incredible. And you are so deliberate and you know exactly what you want. I'm almost wondering, how do you let anyone even into this process with you guys? And, I sort of felt like the big rewards of our collaboration were when Andrea, the lead vocalist, came into the room after doing some vocal takes and telling me, I just really appreciate that you don't stop me like mid-phrase and tell me that I can't pronounce a word like that or I can't sing how I want to sing. And I'm like, the weirder you get, the more it sounds like you and the better it gets. Like the more sort of character that you can put into this and more of yourself that you put into this, it just gets better every time. So I was sort of like the springboard for them to follow their intuition and follow their sort of instincts and, do some things that they wouldn't necessarily have thought of first, maybe just because, people get into habits and people find like their familiar, comfortable zones. But that was really the beauty of that collaboration, I think, when we sort of got to share the ideas and I could help push them into their sort of, into their comfort zone, but further into that place where they're being more expressive and more, after what they were going for, instead of like, oh, I don't know, like, you should make that a little mellower, or you should make that a little more tame. Like, I remember finishing a mix and, Andrea was like, oh, I want the drums to come in like crazy here. And so, I started running the drums through like an old Neve mic preamp, like, incorrect, totally incorrect. Line level through the preamp is not right, but it was so distorted and, literally getting fold back distortion where things are starting to shut off. It's just getting so loud.
Was it 1073?
Technically, it was a 1070L, which is a sort of a rare one-off module that was made for an Australian film console. But basically, yes, it was a 1073 style preamp, and just getting this insane sound, and her face just lit up, and she jumped up out of the couch and was like, that's what needs to happen here, And I was like, oh, I was just sort of like getting it set, but like, okay, cool, great, like let's do this,
Yeah.
And so get to push each other into the zones where it was like, we just want to hear what we want to hear, we want to hear like these exciting elements. And again, talk about negative spaces. That is a band that knows really how to use the negative space of a song to highlight the important elements and to focus on, this is what you are paying attention to. This is what this song is about. Down to like, if there's tracks on that album where it was like they recorded the vocal at home. We can't hear enough of the fish tank in the background anymore. We want to hear more of the fish tank bleed on the vocal mic. It was like, oh, okay, hold on. Let me pull some of that back. I thought maybe you wanted less of that, but let me pull it back up a little bit. And that was, when you go and listen to that song, you're in a place. When you put that song in your headphones, you're transported to a place all of a sudden that if that fish tank wasn't there, might not feel the same way.
I love it. More fish tank.
Wasn't
that Will Ferrell's second follow-up skit that didn't go viral? Like more cowbell. Awesome, dude. So let's see. Quick question. You brought up the great point of like, I'm so glad you didn't just jump in on the talkback and stop me midway. So I'm going to flip that to you and say, when is it the right time to hit the talkback from the control room and stop the performance or stop the band in the middle of something? Is it ever appropriate?
I mean, I'll try pretty hard to never stop the take, just in case, like it's not my place to sort of derail the momentum. But if I hear something that's, drastically wrong, one time I was working on a track and I noticed like, the keyboard and the bass, you guys are playing a half step apart. Like, are you sure that's what you wanted?
Right.
And again, my approach is always, and this comes back to when I was an artist in a band and an engineer told me, this is my record now. And I was like, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were around for the 8 months we were writing these songs. It's my place in the studio to say like, is this what you guys wanted? Let me just like, because sometimes, in a rehearsal room, in a small practice space, like things get blurry. Everyone's really loud. Things are cranked up. You do miss things. You might not have noticed this. So, it was my place to just say like, after the take was over, I popped my head into the room and said, hey guys, just wanted to double check something here because I'm noticing there's a rub happening when you get to like this part of the song. Can we just play it together in the room and see if we can figure out what's going on? And then we realize, oh yeah, we are playing like two different notes here. Let's fix that, and
yeah,
that's when I'll finally, get up out of the chair and say, okay guys, let's just pause for a second and figure out why something's not, if the band keeps hitting the same sort of moment in the song where they all stop. Okay, wait, let's pause for a second before we roll this again and dissect this. Let's take 5 minutes and like strip it down, figure out what is causing the problem or why everybody's getting confused here and stopping and like see if we can't find a way to smooth that out or understand why and then go back to, rolling and figuring it out.
Yeah, I would describe that as learning to go straight to the toughest parts of what's going on and solve those, because it can be easy to start at the top of the song again, get all the way to the end of the bridge and blow it at the transition into that last double chorus over and over again when all you needed to do was just go figure out what's going on at that transition. And the other thing that's funny that will happen is the band will go, oh yeah, or you might point it out and they might go, okay. And then they just count in and they start at the last double chorus and you have to say like, well, hold on guys. I think you need to back up into the bridge and play across that transition so you can figure it out,
Right. Precisely. And so at least we have a good edit point.
So in Mr. Twin Sister, there's killer sounding drums and synths. There's also some really clever use of like, I don't know if it's auto-tune or vocoder or something, but were there any production elements about tops and bottoms that you remember and just, cool techniques that you want to talk about from those guys?
I'm trying to think back. That particular track, again, a big part of the sound of that track is gating things, using the negative space. I just feel like, again, like everybody wants to talk about how cool compression is, and nobody wants to talk about how cool gates are. Gates are so freaking cool. They make things more dynamic, not less dynamic. And the thing that makes music cool is dynamics, and recording cool sounding drums from getting them to be punchy, right? That's what everybody wants, these big punchy in your face drums. And it's like the compressor is removing that. The compression is smearing it all together and truncating it, and it's becoming less dynamic and less punchy. You can focus with the attack and release times elements of, allowing certain element of the transient to come through, or a certain part of the transient to come through, but you're not really highlighting the off space. And I love that, on that record, it's just really like you're hearing the kick. Now you're hearing the snare. Now you're hearing the bass lines. Now you're hearing the synth sound. It's very, very like, these are what you're supposed to focus on. And I think that the gate is, massively important there.
I love it, man. Highlight the off part at Strange Weather.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. All right. So, and then as far as gates go, I mean, are you reminding us that we might want to have actual outboard gates, hold on to those old school rack units and record through them? Or is it safe for us to just stick to the plug-in gates?
Okay. That comes down to where you need the gate in your signal chain. Because, the in the box gates, I use Pro Tools stock Dynamic 3 gate every day. I got no problem about it. But I also use tons of old noisy outboard gear. And that noisy outboard gear, when you want to talk about those micro silences, again, in the background, you're just adding all this hiss and white noise to the background. And that's just smearing that line. When there's a short pause, I want to hear negative space. I want to hear, digital black nothing. And if I'm using my 1176 on the snare drum, there's hiss on that 1176. I got to use the gate after the compressor. If I'm not using a noisy piece of outboard gear, I can get away with using the gate in the computer because there's not a bunch of noisy circuitry after it closes. But if there is a bunch of noisy stuff, I'm going to use the hardware outboard gate because I want to get rid of the hiss that's coming with the sound now. So it just depends on, again, it's about signal flow and gains, where you need things in the chain. So definitely if you have some old outboard gates, hang on to them because they're going to come in handy when you got to, that plate reverb is just hissing away in the back, but it doesn't come in until the bridge because you're using it as an effect for the strings or something. It's like, either use the mute button and automate it off and on when it comes in, or start using gates and get that noise floor to kind of chill out in the background because that's, again, just going to highlight the things that are coming out of the noise floor and above that surface noise and make them more punchy and more clear.
That's cool, man. The console that I have here is a custom MCI board that they built for Criteria Studios in the 70s. And they actually put gates into all 24 channels of the mixer section. So it's built in.
You're a lucky dog.
I don't use them as much as I should, but now I'm getting excited to use them. But I've kept around, I have a pair of the Aphex gates and some of the Keypex gates and stuff. And
oh yeah, old school.
The cool thing to remember about using hardware gates is reminding us that the things that you can do in the moment and not wait till later or the computer allow the artists and the performers to hear it in their headphones. And then it becomes part of the performance. And like you're talking about hearing those microspaces, you may need to hear the microspaces in order to be able to perform the part correctly even,
100%. I am all about the headphone mix being the best it can be. And I want the band or the artist or who's ever on the other side of that glass in their headphones being psyched right away. And that even came down to a hefty investment in a really good headphone system. That was the least exciting purchase I probably have ever made in terms of studio equipment goes, was like, wow, I'm really about to spend $5,000 on freaking headphone systems here. But I want them to be so psyched when the bass player's always like, man, I'm not getting any low end in my cans. It's like, yeah, because we're using this like janky, plasticky sounding headphone monitor system, and it just literally can't reproduce the low end of your 5-string bass. I'm sorry, so that was a huge element to the studio. That was a massive upgrade for us, I think.
So what did you guys, is it cool to talk about what you chose?
Sure. Yeah, we went with the private Q system, right? MyTech.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's the brand. Yeah, MyTech. I think they're actually in Brooklyn. But they make a really high-powered, very, very clean analog headphone system that just works. There's no we before that we had the hearback system, and certain really, really delicately listeners would notice that there's latency in the headphones, and I'm like, oh, that's not good. I got James Genus telling me that like there's latency in the headphones and I can't get rid of it, and it's just like that guy wants to hear 10 milliseconds, and he can hear 10 milliseconds or smaller gaps than that. It's just like, that's unacceptable. That's just unacceptable to be a commercial studio and trying to get good takes out of people. And they're going, yo, man, I can't even tell what I'm doing.
Yeah. I noticed that like even, to drop the word micro again, even micro latency is something that you hear, especially when it's a vocal mic.
Oh,
you just,
so strange.
Something just sounds funny or strange in the headphones. And if you can get no latency going on, then you hear your voice. I remember hearing somebody talk about the introduction of digital recording, and the very first digital recorders, which I think were designed in such a way that they had almost no latency because they weren't trying to do the computer thing back then, but that there were bands, I don't know if it was the Bee Gees or something like that, who traditionally sang thick, rich harmonies and layers of harmonies, and they couldn't sing in tune using the new tech because it was messing with their sense of tuning in a way that they couldn't put their finger on.
Right, because all of a sudden you're hearing like that chorusing effect or that slightly, like doubled effect, and you're going, all right, well, is that me or is that the recording? Okay, let me adjust, and you're constantly like self-adjusting, When you're that good a listener, and those guys were just exceptional listeners, they could really hear those details. I remember hearing a famous story about them, almost getting in a fist fight over 1 BPM of a track. It's like, who can feel 1 BPM? Well, I guess the Bee Gees can feel 1 BPM. They can feel the difference between 88 and 89. Like, it is important. And so if I could totally imagine them being in the studio and being like, I can't get this right because I'm hearing some chorusing effect, or I can't adjust to this because it's confusing me. So
now, is your headphone system a mixer, a personal mixer kind of system, or is it just one volume for the headphones? And then is it a system where the power comes from my headphone box over at the drum set, or is it one of these old school where there's like a major power amp and it just sort of distributes among all the headphones in the studio? Or am I asking too many technical questions?
No, not at all. Not at all. So our system it's a private individual mix. Everybody can make their own mix. And it is like the power comes from our machine room. We have the brain unit in the machine room, and that feeds out into the, to the walls, and we patch in the, each mixer at the wall, and then they're powered through the brain unit. But we set up, as a per artist situation, we're going to set up the mixers how they want it. So like certain people, if we're working with the whole band, maybe the drummer wants kick, snare, and the rest of the drums. Or if I'm just doing vocals, maybe I'll have like the track on the stereo send and the bass on channel 1 and the vocals on channel 2 and the effects on channel 3. So like if they want more reverb, they can adjust it. Or if they want less reverb, I'll try and have it be however it's going to be the most comfortable for the artist working on the other side, because they're the ones who have to deal with the headphone mixer. I don't.
Right.
I can change the parameters however they want it and make it super easy. And again, you asked about like what's the beauty of a console. That is the beauty of the console. It's literally I hit a button and things are changed. And I can use all 10 of my fingers at the same time and do things super, super fast. And that's not happening with the computer when I'm going like one click, hold on,
Yeah.
So it's just so fast. And like, I really love the fact that when the band comes to the studio and we're getting set up and things are rolling, in an hour, 2 hours, it's like, boom, we got to get this happening and it's going to sound good right away. We're not going to be like futzing with cables and scratchy pots and, oh, this doesn't work. It's just like, I want things to be super efficient, super fast. You put the headphones on and you're like ready to roll.
Yeah, that's so key. Nothing feels better than a session where you're prepared and everything goes really smoothly through sound check. And then you're, within an hour of the band being there, everybody's performing,
Yeah, I remember my first real studio experience. We went to this studio up in Rhode Island and, the outcome was just incredible. But I remember being there as the young 17-year-old band and like, we're all like laying around on the floor while the engineer sat there and tuned the drums for like 4 hours or something. And we're just like, what is happening here? Like, what are we doing? This guy's just like tuning the drums forever. It's just like, oh man, can't we just play? Can't we just like play the songs already? So again, that's just something I've always wanted to keep with me is like, keep everybody excited, keep everybody moving and like, boom, boom, boom. Let's do this. Let's do this.
Do you feel like the time you spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen, I appreciate you listening to this podcast, and I know you're trying to make your best record ever. But when you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then you're ready for UltimateMixingMasterclass.com. We're coming up on the end of the podcast, but I got a couple of questions about a couple of other artists you work with. You want to do that, and then we'll
please
roll out. All right.
Yeah, please.
So Ghostface Killah, featuring Candace Springs, Love Don't Live Here No More. Fantastic track, great story, great beautiful video, and some really deep hip hop storytelling from Ghostface. Talk about that project and what your involvement was there and anything you learned on it.
Well, I learned a ton of things on that particular project. But the really cool story behind that is that there are no samples on that record. That is a live band that we brought into the studio, and I made the samples out of recording a band. So, every morning we would all come to the studio and we would just listen to music. That was how every day started. We would just listen to records and find stuff that, caught somebody's ear. And the band would sort of just get inspired and go out there and start, playing a doo-wop or playing some old like soul inspired tune. And we would then kind of reverse engineer it and be like, oh, okay, this was the record that we just found. Let's chop it up and make it a track now. And then we'd go back and start dicing it up. But again, always trying to treat it as if, when you're sampling records from your turntable into your MPC, you don't get the luxury of selecting the tracks or muting half the instruments so that you could get the clean drums. You got to grab what you can and find the moments that you can find. Ooh, there's a good thing, or there's the moment, So we would really try and treat those tracks. We're going to do big block editing here and grab the band, grab the whole thing here. And dice it up. And that was just such a fun experience to, treat a band and then completely disregard the band and make it just like, okay, this is a record now. This is just like a regular old sample and do what we need to do. And, early on working with my friends and, learning about the MPC and things like that, you learn like these broad stroke techniques. Like, well, if you need to hear the bass from the sample, just like use a filter and cut out all the high end.
Right.
Because you don't have the bass track isolated. So we would do a lot of stuff like that where there's like loads of weird bleed happening, but you just like do a broad stroke with a filter or, cut all the low end and the high end and make things have that sort of telephone effect so that they've got a vibe all of a sudden. And it was really, really super, super fun. And, the other thing I love about that stuff is, again, the level of commitment in the performances from the vocalist. We'd have people come into the studio and lay down their verses and stuff. And it was just, no one ever looked back. No one ever wanted to do a million takes. And it was just sort of this like, we got to do this. We got to get this done. I'm here to do my thing. And here it is, And I just really loved that sort of like commitment to the process.
Yeah, well, there was a comment in the YouTube video where somebody was saying like they just couldn't believe how productive Ghostface Killah is. That was their perspective. So obviously maybe this came out quickly or at a time where there was a lot of other stuff happening. And it's probably at the core of it. It's just that attitude of like, we're here to do it. Let's do it.
Yeah, I just love that. I just really respect that sort of work ethic as opposed to the like, well, let's like just sit around and maybe when it happens, it happens. It's like, I don't have that sort of ability, I guess.
It's just more fun to make more music. That's my experience. I'd rather be working on the next project than still stuck on the last project,
Yeah. And it goes to sort of like a study that I read many, many years ago about, an experiment that was done between two groups of people. And one group of people was told, spend an hour making a piece of pottery and just focus on making one piece of pottery. And then the other group was told, make as many pieces of pottery in this hour that you can. And don't worry about how they look. Just make as many as you can. And more than not, there were people from the make as many as you can category that came out better than the people who spent the entire hour trying to make one good one. And so, on that Ghostface record, we recorded probably 40 tracks or something like that. There's tons of B-roll material. And like, if you listen to that record, there's moments where you'll hear like radio interference and like little ins and outs of things that like, that was all stuff we recorded and that it kind of got left on the cutting room floor, but we found a little appropriate spot to highlight it or, use a piece of it. But like, there was tons of stuff that like, no, this actually isn't as great as we thought it was this morning. Let's skip this one, but that's how you got to do it to get to the Love Don't Live Here No Mores of that record where it's like, okay, this is a certified great track, and it's like, that wasn't the first thing that we made.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, let me ask you this geeky tech question really quick. So you had the band out there and you were capturing multi-track of the band. Were you also capturing an analog 2-track mix of the band at the same time?
Not on that particular record. I don't think I captured like a live to 2 at the same time, but that is a practice I do very often. Especially when things, modern day and age, like people don't have 8 months in the studio to work, things are happening very quick these days. And so one thing I love to do is like, if I know that we're on a super crunch, I'm going to start printing these roughs as we go because it's just going to save us time at the end of the day when we need to start packing up or like, oh, you guys would rather do an extra hour of background vocals as opposed to like, okay, I need to stop you because I have to print these mixes in real time,
Yeah.
It is helpful to kind of always be having a reference as you go. And there was a record you mentioned earlier, the Lost Brothers. And that was something that that record is basically everybody in the same room. And we were printing rough mixes from the jump. And there's one of them that's the final mix on the record is the first raw rough mix that it was just like, cool, this one's done. And it's also a take one, which I really love.
Now with using an API console like you have set up, can you mic up the band, pull up the faders, have the individual direct outs go to Pro Tools for multitrack, but also have an analog, pure, straight to the 2 mix going that you can just capture as a stereo recording? Because in my experience doing that at the Bonnaroo studio, which is, I did a studio backstage at Bonnaroo for 15 years, and we did a ton of that because there just was no, there was no time for remixing. So it was like, might as well just capture an analog 2 mix. There's a thing in the sound that's just so magical if you can allow yourself to do that.
I agree. There was a record that I made with an artist named Lonnie Holly, who's like an improvisational sort of almost like free jazz singer. And that was how we did that record. And that's a day in the studio. That was just a day in the studio. And I printed those as we went. And, you know, one of the first things that I love, there's a track called Standing on the Edge of the Ocean where he, you know, you hear the band kind of warming up and I'm like, oh, this needs a little bit more reverb. And you hear the reverb kind of come in on the next line, you know, it's like, oh, okay, that's fine.
That's great. That's great. All right, cool. So let's move on. Last one I want to ask you was just, you know, you had the honor to work with Booker T. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, that was just an exceptional experience. The only unfortunate part was that, you know, I just did the mixing on that record and it was all unattended because they live out on the West Coast. So we didn't really get to hang and there wasn't that personal sort of experience where we're in the studio together making these decisions. But, you know, to get those tracks sent to me and know the story behind all that music. And I learned a ton on that process because I didn't realize that Booker T, I mean, I was obviously a fan of the MGs. I grew up loving soul music and R&B music and all that stuff. But I didn't realize his hand was in so many of my other favorite records. I had no idea he produced Stardust by Willie Nelson. I had no idea he worked with Carlos Santana. I had no idea he worked with all these, you know, Bill Withers. He discovered Bill Withers. Like, you know, these are just things you don't hear. And the guy is just literally a living legend. And so the beauty of that album, Note by Note, is that it is the journey of his musical life. You know, it's every sort of touchstone in his musical journey. And to mix the album through all of those eras of music was a great sort of challenge to get it accurate, you know, because this song that was from the 60s, they wanted that 60s vibe. And then all the way to the newest material that, you know, Booker and his son Teddy collabed on together, where it's like, this is modern programmed drums, you know, down to, you know, ducking on the, you know, kick drum, like, you know, side chaining the tracks. It's like, this was not a one trick pony kind of record where it's like, oh, this is all going to sound like the 60s or it's all going to sound like 2020. It needs to be sort of all across the board, have a great vibe, you know. And actually a funny little side note about that record was, you know, I don't know if other people feel this way, but, you know, I get delivered this record by Booker T and, you know, I'm a little nervous, you know, I don't want to, you know, screw it up. I'm in the studio, it's unattended. I'm sitting there with my assistant and I'm just going like, man, I really don't want to screw this up. I really don't want to screw this up. And so I already knew that we were going to have Greg Calby at Sterling do the mastering. And so I sent him one of my first mixes and he called me back and he said, you know, I don't really know how to speak in mixer terms, but, you know, it needs to sound more like a record. You're not there yet, you know? And I was like, okay, so I need to dig in a little more because I was being too safe and I was being too timid to like dig into this. I just was like, oh man, I better not fuck this up. Pardon my French. I better not screw this up. You know, I want to just make it good. And he called me right back and was like, no, man, you got to do what you normally do because your records normally are crazy and they sound great. Like, don't hold back on this one either. And so it gave me sort of the confidence to like, oh, right, I know what I'm doing. I can do this and do that's why they called me. That's why they asked me to do this in the first place, was because they heard the records that I had worked on and they liked sort of the bold approach that I could take with doing these mixes. And they knew that it needed that sort of wide variety and, you know, intention behind each one of the tracks. So it was super humbling and flattering. And then eventually I did get to meet Booker at his gig in New York. And he was just, he's the sweetest, coolest, like calmest guy maybe I've ever met. His demeanor is just like the coolest dude. I mean, if you could think about just like permanent, like sunglasses kind of vibe, like he's so chill and soft spoken. And, that's just something I wish I could, I'm sort of a little hyperactive and excited all the time. And I was like, God, this guy is so freaking cool. Like, wish I could be more like him when I grow up.
I like it, man. I'm adding to your byline here that it's highlight the off part of your music with permanent sunglasses on at Strange Weather Studio.
Yeah, permanent sunglasses. You gotta play it cool, man. You gotta play it cool.
Groovy, man. Well, I really appreciate you reminding us that like it's hard to do. It's hard. Like when we get scared, we become less confident in being true to ourselves and our individualism. Yet when we are true to ourselves and our individualism, I think we always deliver our best work because it's the boldest and it's just the most genuine, So it's great to hear that story from you again, that even when working with a great artist like Booker T, you had to trust yourself and just do your thing in order to make the artist happy.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Let me go to a closing question here. This one's hypothetical. And we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. You go back in time and you find young Daniel and you're like, and maybe you're like, yeah, it's probably a good idea to pick up that role in VS 1880. Or maybe you're going back earlier than that. But you go back to give yourself one bit of advice and you say, listen, dude, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
Yeah, worry less about the equipment.
Nice.
Yeah,
just after you told yourself to get the role in VS 1880.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can really use whatever's there. And regardless if it's a straight to cassette 4-track or a beautiful, gorgeous studio like Strange Weather, it's like, if the intention behind the song isn't getting captured, then you're missing the mark. An artist like Daniel Johnston, who made a career out of literally recording himself on a boombox, was some of the most personal music to me that I grew up listening to. And that is not in any, metric standard of like excellence in terms of like a Steely Dan approach, which is like, this is going to be perfect, and they're both valid. They're both valid. It took me a long time to come around on the Steely Dan, but I understand it now and I see what they were going for, but they're both valid approaches. So it's not so much about the equipment until it's about like, are we getting the intention? If the intention requires higher quality equipment, okay, let's figure out how to do that. Let's get ourselves in a studio that can provide that atmosphere and that equipment that we need. But if the song is about something, just make sure you're getting the music right and you're keeping the vibe right, because that's what makes it exciting to the listener. You got to remove yourself from the equation and remember that this is for other people to listen to and enjoy. The same way you and I got hooked on listening to music in the first place and ended up in studios because we love listening to music first. You don't want to ruin that experience for somebody else because you had to have this and you were just so gassed up on like setting the mics up and stuff like that, and you didn't get a cool drum sound. It's like you took away the experience for the listener.
I think that we forget that when we start out in recording, we're more of an expert than we give ourselves credit for, because we've had, we may have had many years of listening to and loving music before we even start to want to record something. So we may have a deep appreciation for what's good. We just don't know how to make it yet.
Yeah, and when you're overwhelmed with the amount of information that you get into once you start going down the road of like, okay, I'm going to become the engineer. There's so much information, especially now with, all these YouTube videos and stuff on the internet. It's overwhelming. It's totally overwhelming. And I think it's so easy to get caught up in like, oh, I guess I need to buy all this plugins and I guess I need to get all this equipment and stuff like that. And you just lose sight of the fact that like, I don't even like this. I don't even think this is sounding cool yet. What do I like? What do I like about this music to begin with?
Well, I love that you just brought up Daniel Johnson on the podcast. Now, I haven't had him on the show or anybody working on those records, but I have had Bill Schnee, who did the Steely Dan record you're referring to. He just preceded you, so you're again your podcast mates with all your references, which is great.
No, that's amazing, and we're all sort of in this thing together, you know. And
Exactly.
I don't think that there's any reason to consider like rivalry or competitive nature. It's just like we're all out here and we're all serving the artist. You know, it's like I love that this is like the recording studio rock stars, but we always have to remember that as the person who knows the way around the studio, we're still in the service industry section of the job, and we're serving the artist's vision, and we're serving the artist's intention behind why they wrote this song in the first place. And if your goal is not to help them get to that, then your goal is not really in the right place.
Yeah, and as you pointed out earlier in the show, the absolutely, we're not living in a competitive rivalry of making music together. We're even from all the people and styles that are different from where our personal tastes might be, there are so many things to learn. And you pointed at that out in the beginning, talking about working on a session that may not be your favorite thing, but you learn a really great technique or a tool. Because we're at the end of the day, we're also craftspeople, you know?
Yes, exactly. You know, you're still a technician and working on building something for someone else, you know?
Very cool, man. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us. It's been a super fun hang with you. And man, I loved all the stuff you shared and what a great collection of music. How can the rock stars go find out more about you? Where do you want them to go check out your stuff? You know, if they need to make their next totally amazing sounding record, where should they go to find you?
You can always email me at daniel@strangeweatherbrooklyn.com or find me on Instagram. If you have any questions, I'm always down to help and talk. And, you know, if you're in New York and you want to come by the studio and check some stuff out and listen to music, never hesitate to give a ring. I'm always down to share the knowledge and share the experience.
That's awesome, man. Well, dude, thank you again for being on the show with us. Can't wait to hang with you in person. And I'm looking forward to being back in Brooklyn and visiting at some point.
Well, look, when the world is safe enough for you to do so, I deeply encourage it.
Awesome, dude. Well, thank you so much, man. We'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure. Anytime, man. Later.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. Sound Porter Mastering, OWC, Atom Audio, Spectra 1964, Isotope, and JZ Microphones. Remember to get your free mastering demo at soundporter.com and use the coupon codes ROCK10 at Isotope for an additional 10% off, and ROCKSTARS at jzmic.com for 50% off the BB29 for a limited time. You'll find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to give a big thank you to our rockstar team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Hugh McDonald for additional podcasts and video production. You guys rock. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.